Our guest this hour is an award-winning author, media educator, and leading expert on gender, feminism, and geopolitics in the James Bond franchise and other action films. Her insights have been featured on CNN, the BBC, Esquire, and Vice TV, among others, and she's also authored and edited several influential books, including Resisting James Bond, Power and Privilege in the Daniel Craig Era, Geographies, Genders, and Geopolitics of James Bond, and For His Eyes Only, The Women of James Bond. Dr. Lisa Funnell, welcome to the show. And do you mind if we start with your James Bond origin story?
Sure.
So how did you become a fan of the James Bond franchise?
Ooh, so I grew up watching the James Bond films with my dad. So we would have Sunday dinners in front of the TV. We would get our TV trays out. My dad loved steak, so usually it was steak, baked potato, Caesar salad. And then we would invariably put on a movie to watch. And you're talking about the 80s, right? And we would throw on a James Bond film. And it became a bonding, pun intended, a bonding moment for my dad and myself. And when I had the opportunity to decide what I was going to study when I went to university, it just made sense to study James Bond.
Okay, so the 80s, then Roger Moore would have been your James Bond, at least for most of the 80s. And did you go to the theaters to see the movies as well, or basically home video?
Oh, I love watching movies at home.
Okay.
So you're talking Betamax, you're talking VHS, and yes, Roger Moore was the Bond that I grew up with, and because of that, I love Bonds that are wittier, where there's that sense of adventure, that sense of fun. And I grew up, and I always idolized the women of Octopussy. You know, these smart, independent, entrepreneurial women who lived by themselves, who made their own money, who could defend themselves. You know, my sources of inspiration growing up were Princess Leia from Star Wars and the women from Octopussy.
So that's certainly an unusual path to take, right? Most people would just become fans of the movies and that would be it. But here you've turned it into an academic career. And you mentioned Octopussy, so I'm assuming that's probably what led to your interest in that first book, The Women of Bond, right?
Yeah.
Oh.
So that one is the first anthology. So that brings together 28 essays written by scholars around the world talking about the women of James Bond. And I had already written a thesis on the women of James Bond, but I really wanted to make it collaborative in nature. And I just love engaging with other scholars. So that was the first anthology I did, but the Geographies, Genders, and Geopolitics of James Bond was the first Bond book that I wrote, and I wrote that with Klaus Dodds.
So we mentioned the 80s. What about the Connery era of James Bond? Were there women that stood out to you from that time?
Oh, absolutely. I'm a big fan of Fiona Volpe, who wasn't going to be seduced by James Bond, and she has this great speech where she says, "I forgot your ego, Mr. Bond, James Bond, who only sleeps with women, and, you know, they think that heavenly choirs are going to sing," and she says, you know, they turn from the side of right and they follow you. She says, "But not this one." And she just defies James Bond. And what I love about the Connery era women is that the franchise was not purely formulaic at that point. So you get all of these really interesting representations of women. You get someone like Dominique Derval, who you think has been abused by Emilio Largo, who is she's a kept woman. He's her lover. He says he's her uncle, but he's not her uncle. And at the end of the film, she actually kills him and saves James Bond. She avenges the death of her brother, and she's the hero of that film. And so you have a movie like Thunderball that has just these glimpses of women who are fascinating and interesting and who kind of break the mold.
I'm glad you said that because, as you know, normally when there's a new Bond film announced and there's a new female lead, they will go to the press and say, my character is not a typical Bond girl. I'm different. This is a new era. But there have been strong Bond women from the very beginning of the series.
Absolutely. And I think that it's a mistake to throw away the strong tradition of women. And, you know, I think a much more impactful statement would be, I get to be part of this strong, vibrant tradition of women in the James Bond franchise. I think that would be a great way of positioning themselves and say, instead of saying I'm something different and distinct, when you're not necessarily different and distinct, and it's okay not to be different and distinct. Women were heroic in the 1960s, and that was a beautiful thing. And I think that there's this idea or impression that as time goes on, things just get more progressive and more positive. And that doesn't always happen in the Bond films. The women of the 1970s are not as strong as the women of the 1960s. You see the female villains are kind of watered down and they become secondary or side-based characters instead of being strong and at the forefront. So I think we have to be careful when we say things get better or I'm going to be something different when it's a great tradition to embrace.
I think about Octopussy, and you have Maude Adams portraying that character with her band of, I guess they were acrobats, right?
Yeah, they were acrobats and gymnasts, and they were in the circus. They were great. And
the film after that was A View to a Kill, 1985, and I know that Tanya Roberts as Stacey Sutton gets a lot of criticism, but you also have Grace Jones as a strong villain in the film.
And Grace Jones had two female friends as well. There was a trio of them. So it was Grace Jones and then two women. One was Jenny Flex. I can't remember the name of the other one. And she was very strongly bonded to those women. The reason why she turned on Zorin in the end, yes, he betrayed her, but he also killed her friends. That's why she turned her back on Zorin. So there's another strong tradition of women. And you look at someone like Mayday who really breaks the mold, where it's Grace Jones, it's her persona. She was involved in the design of the costumes. It's almost as if the Bond film can barely even contain such a strong and vibrant presence like Grace Jones. And in the film, she's kind of an enigma because at the end of the day, she leaves that film on her own terms. She chooses to die. There is no Bondian justice for all the people that she killed. Instead, she leaves on her own terms, and I think that that's something that's quite unique in a Bond film.
What about the literary side of Bond? Are there any strong women that you would point out in the Ian Fleming novels?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of a timely novel, which would be Moonraker. I'm a big fan of Gala Brand. Gala Brand is not Dr. Holly Goodhead. Gala Brand was a cop who was undercover, and she basically turned James Bond down at the end, and that novel ends on a pretty devastating note for him, where he just says, I have to get out of, her life, and I'm going to have to be the cold-hearted James Bond. But there is a representation of that kind of moment in Quantum of Solace, where Bond and Camilla Montez separate, where she realizes Bond can't be with her, Bond is still in love with Vesper Lynd, and the two of them part ways. And it's kind of a great thing to see that Bond can be, in a film, working alongside someone that he doesn't have to sleep with, right? Like, because we work alongside a lot of people in our lives, right? And we don't sleep with everybody that we meet. And so it was nice to see, in Quantum of Solace, two people working together for their own personal goals and connecting, and then looking at Moonraker, the novel, understanding that Gala Brand had her own objective. She had a fiancé, and she stuck to it for that novel.
We're talking with Dr. Lisa Funnell today on the Vintage Rock and Pop Shop. She wrote the book Geographies, Genders, and Geopolitics of James Bond. The entire world of James Bond 007 has changed dramatically over the past few months, with Amazon now calling the creative shots on all future Bond films, and we have two new producers. Amy Pascal, who worked on the Spider-Man series, and David Heyman, who worked on the Harry Potter series. So I wanted to get, I don't want to say your predictions. Actually, I do want to say your predictions. What do you think about all of this?
Look, I'm very happy and positive about it. I was not a fan of the Daniel Craig era, especially the last two films. I felt that they were a whole bunch of downers. It was one downer after another. And I felt that the films lost the magic that made James Bond Bond. So for me, seeing, you know, two individuals stepping up, wanting to be producers, talking about, I think they said that it was going to be exciting and fresh new takes on James Bond, seeing the momentum, like how quickly the tide has turned, that we're not going to be waiting until 2028 for a Bond film. I feel like there's a lot of good positive momentum. It's going to be a blockbuster film. I'm just really excited that we're talking about new James Bond. And I'm very, very hopeful that it's not going to be another tell me your whole life story James Bond. At the end of the day, he's a secret agent with a job. And those are the types of films that I want to see. I want to pick up a Bond film, any Bond film, and be able to understand what is going on in that Bond film. Make it a mission-specific Bond film, and you'll have me hooked from the outset.
So I'm with you on this, because as much as I enjoyed the beginning of the Daniel Craig era, it just seemed to be this extended meditation on trauma, you know, and it just kept going on and on. And like you, I am thrilled that we're even talking about James Bond at all, because it had been radio silence. There was really nothing in the pipeline, no casting, no script, no nothing. And now there's at least something to talk about, something to look forward to. And I know there are many James Bond fans out there who are afraid of characters being spun off maybe as a TV show. It was mentioned in the press. I don't think there was any truth to the story, that there was going to be a Miss Moneypenny TV series. And my take on this is, why not? You know, why not expand the world of James Bond a little bit? It doesn't, you know, you don't have to go crazy, but why not have something like that?
And it's not the first time there was talk of spin-offs. There was a talk of a spin-off with Wei Lin, played by Michelle Yeoh, and that didn't work because of her other obligations. She created her own production company and wanted to do that. There was talk about a Jinx Johnson, played by Halle Berry, spinoff. So it's not the first time that this has been mentioned. And I think there's this fascination with the 00 world, right? Like, what does it take to be a 00 agent? What does it take to work at MI6? There's a lot of interesting ground that can be covered. And there's a way of doing it that you don't impede on the legacy of James Bond, but you can bounce off of it. I would love to hear more about a different 00 agent. I have no problem with learning more about Moneypenny. I don't think they went far enough with the origin story of Moneypenny in the Daniel Craig era. I think she could have been a step further along, and she could have been a little bit more action-oriented. But hey, if you want to do a fresh take on Moneypenny, I'm there with you. I just think that there's a lot of interesting characters, and there's a lot of interesting ideas that have hooked us in as audiences for generation after generation. And if we look at the fact that so many people watch their content through streaming, this is a way for you to maybe hook in new audiences. This is a way to create more content in between making blockbuster action films. It makes smart marketing sense. And if you are a company like Amazon that is already doing this type of approach, that's already putting out series, and Amazon puts out series that are very well polished, they have high production values, right? They're going to put content out that could be, you know, that the little crumbs or the nibbles that we have in between blockbuster films. And I'm not against that. I'm actually quite for it.
And it's already happened on the literary side with Ian Fleming publications. We've already had characters licensed out, like there was a Miss Moneypenny Diaries series. Raymond Benson was just announced that he's going to be doing a Felix Leiter book. I don't hear anyone on the literary side saying, oh, they've tarnished the brand, it's watered down now. You know, it's total opposite. Everybody's really excited and looking forward to this stuff.
Yeah, and so that's just precedent, right? It's a different form. It's precedent. And I think sometimes it's fear of the unknown. It's never happened before when it comes to the film side of things. I think it's just going to take us taking a step forward, moving forward, and seeing where the pieces land. At the end of the day, it's something for us to get excited about. It's also, if it's terrible, it's something that we get to critique. Like, that is our prerogative as fans, to be able to say, I like this and I don't like that. I'm going to spend time watching this. I'm not going to spend time watching that. I just like the fact that you and I get to meet and we get to talk about James Bond, and it's new and it's fresh, and I don't have the answers, and I love the fact that I don't have the answers. It's in a time of political unrest, and there's so much going on in the world. For me, it is a spark or a light that's going to keep me going.
Well, 2020 was the last time that we had anything new to talk about. I'm glad I'm probably going to see another movie in my lifetime. So it's, it's all very positive. I want to point our listeners over to where they can get your books and the best information about what you're up to.
So you can find my books on Amazon. It's the way that it turns out. So you can find my books on Amazon. That's the easiest place to find them. If you're looking for me on social media, it's Dr. Lisa Funnell, 2 N's, 2 L's, and Funnell. You can find me on Instagram, posting about my dog, my puppy galore. I'm on Blue Sky. I'm not on Twitter. I'm on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn if you want to do a professional connection. If you go to lisafunnell.com, that's my website. So you can find me. If you Google me, I'm sure information will come up and you can find me and we can connect.
Dr. Lisa, I want to thank you so much for coming on and chatting with us, and hopefully, as maybe there are developments in the near future regarding James Bond movies or possibly TV shows, you'll come back on and we can chat about them.
Absolutely. Sounds good.